something that Maitland DeLong, taught me, where he showed me one of the papers that he and one of his students at the time named Miller. It's one of the original papers where you remember all the stuff that came out about the GPI being overactive and Parkinson's disease. And when it came to Tourette, I remember early on myself, and then Justin Sanchez was with us for a while. We looked at a lot of the signals, and he looked at a lot of animal signals. And then when Aysegul Gunduz came along, and she's the brains of the operation, for sure. We got picked on some, like, for looking at those signals, and even one of the reviewers on a grant, really boldly questioned whether our signal was even real, and wanted us to go back to raw signals too. Getting back to the Sanjay Gupta thing, we went back to the raw signals, and we realized that again we were focusing so much on the objective lens of the microscope. We zoomed out 50,000 feet. Say, look, we can make a human Tic-Detector off of like the signal without even like using that much, trial, just looking at M1 portent.
Even though what we do now is pretty crude, frankly, I think it's going to become more and more sophisticated, and we're going to, at some point, be able to do things that are augmentative, and there will be an ethical dilemma. I think that this power is, like a lot of power, right? It's a tool, and it can be used for good, or it can be used for evil.
Welcome to Stimulating Brains.
Hello and welcome back to Stimulating Brains, this time episode number 25. In this episode I speak with none less than Mike Okun and Kelly Foote, who are the power couple of DBS. Folks in Gainesville, Florida, together organized the Think Tank for the 10th year this year. The DBS Think Tank, probably one of the most important DBS conferences that happens on this narrow topic. We talk about a lot of exciting things, and I think neither of them really needs an introduction. They're really famous power couple, started the Norman Fixel Institute together in Gainesville and essentially built one of the biggest DBS services worldwide there, essentially from scratch, as we learn. And we talk about various things, efforts around connectedness, the think tank, setting up a Tourette's disease collaboration database, and a lot of other things that I find really interesting. Also the interaction between neurology and neurosurgery in general and in Gainesville. So I'm sure you're going to enjoy this. Thank you for tuning in. Stimulating Brains, episode number 25. So Mike Okun, Kelly Foote, thank you so much. It's a great honor that you find the time to participate in this. Maybe to briefly summarize, Dr. Okun, you did your MD at U Florida, then also trained with Maitland DeLong and Jerry Vitek at Emory. And Dr. Foote, you did your Bachelor of Science at University of Utah in Materials and Engineering, then med school as well in Utah, and did surgery internship and residency at U Florida. So I think you also in 2002 did some specialized training in Grenoble and Emory. So I read Emory in both of your CVs and thought maybe that's where you met up. Is that correct? Or
well, actually, we met up. We were both residents at the University of Florida at the same time. So that's where we originally met. And the collision at Emory on our paths was engineered. That was after we had already decided when we were residents that we were going to start a DBS program at the University of Florida. So I went to Grenoble, and then my last 3 months of fellowship time, I intentionally went to Emory, where Michael was finishing his 2-year fellowship, so that we could spend that last 3 months together scheming and planning and stealing everything we could from the smart people at Emory.
Amazing. And in Grenoble, did you train with Benabid as well, or who was
there at the time? Yes, yeah. I did. And we stole a bunch of everything we could steal from them as well. That's the secret, right?
Yeah, Kelly likes to use the term steal. I like to use the term import, or export. So they exported their knowledge, through us, but it's not a small. It's not a small point. So one of the most important things in our careers has been our friendship, and we've been friends so long and respected one another at the bedside and in seeing people, when we were in training, even as a neurologist and a neurosurgeon, and then, bringing that, forward into our relationship over the years has, kept our work marriage, together, for, now we just, on July 1st, we just hit into our 21st year. So we hit 20 years here together at University of Florida, but we've been at it for a long time. And we honestly, we learned.
Well, 20 years on faculty.
20 years on faculty, right? Longer than that.
25 years previously, probably.
Yeah, even.
Yeah.
So
how many DBS surgeries did you do together? Do you know?
How many DBS surgeries? Well, we have a plaque somewhere when we hit 1,000, I remember, and that was a decade ago.
Yeah, that was a long time
ago.
So, I think we hit around 2000, but then at some point, so it used to be so first of all, let me just say for people listening, one of the most important things for me was, a lot of times the neurosurgeon will not let the neurologist into the operating room. And if they let you into the operating room, you aren't necessarily allowed to talk or participate or anything. And so, it was a privilege for me to come through Emory, and then coming through the Emory program, we both came through that program and overlapped for, 3 months during fellowship. And that really allowed us the opportunity to be together. So before there was anybody else here, and, when we started, there were only 2 faculty, just Kelly and I. And so I did everything, botulinum toxin, kids, adults, anything that had anything to do with movement. But over a number of years, we've trained over 70 fellows. And so I think we probably did the first 1,500 or so together. But now we have a bunch of really talented people who, have trained here and other places that come to the OR, right? So it's not just the Kelly and Michael show anymore. The last couple of years, it's expanded. And
now there are 16 movement disorders neurologists and 2 neurosurgeons.
2 including you?
2 including me, yeah. So me and my partner, Justin Hilliard.
One of the amazing things is how he made it so many years as the only surgeon. Like the volume.
One man's amazing is another man's stupidity, right? Like that seems like a crazy thing. In retrospect, I should have gotten a partner much, much sooner.
Makes sense. Sure. So we'll dive into that a bit more, the neurology, neurosurgery relationship, but maybe just to break the ice for listeners to get to know you a bit better independently from work. I often ask about hobbies or things you do beside work. Is there anything either of you does that, is interesting or doesn't have to be interesting, can be boring as well? Or do you do some things together beside work as well?
Well, we do things together, like we go eat. And our wives have been close friends for a long time. So we do whatever they tell us to do. So various activities like that. I would say one of the unusual things in terms of hobbies that has kept me sane over the years is I've had a running weekly poker game for 25 years. It started with, well, actually, you used to play in the poker game. Even Michael Okun used to play in the poker game. He hasn't played for a long time, but it's one of these poker games where once a week we get together at one of the people's houses, and for us we drink wine and have a meal provided by whoever's hosting, and frankly it's much more about the people than it is the cards. Yeah. But there's a poker game that ostensibly gets people together. So poker, I guess, is one of my hobbies. And then I would say my other hobby is being outside. I like running in the woods, which is one of the things that's really nice here in Gainesville, Florida. I like going to the beach. I like, hiking, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, and I'll say, over the years, we've spent a lot of holidays together with our families, and his kids are older than my kids. I have younger kids, so we have a little bit of we're out of sync on that, but we've watched both of our kids grow up over the years, which has been great. And when our house got, we had a huge leak and we had to move out of our house. We actually moved into the Foote's house for a month, which was fun. And and that's when I learned really how hard a neurosurgeon works. And then his kids started calling me dad because I was around more than he was. So we have a good thing. And then with my kids, we like to do history stuff, and not unpredictably. For people that know me, I love history, so we go around and look at history stuff and try to learn the history of things and find hidden stuff. And so we're kind of nerds in the Okun house, and it is sort of an interesting relationship because Kelly would be the more athletic, impulsive risk taker, and I'm more the conservative historian nerd, but we fit together pretty well.
Sounds amazing. We have talked about some turning points in your career already, but maybe do you want to highlight some of the key mentors or turning points that were important to get where you are now? Either of you.
Sure, I'll go first. So when I was looking for a place to train after medical school in neurosurgery, Albert Roten was the chairman of neurosurgery at the University of Florida, who for any neurosurgeons who may be listening, they all know who he is. But he's sort of the guy who was largely responsible for us learning microsurgical anatomy and using a microscope to do neurosurgery. So he was someone that we all would have loved to train with, and I was lucky to train with him. But when I started, it wasn't that common to have an engineering degree before going into medicine. And I wanted to exploit that, and functional neurosurgery seemed like the obvious choice. And William Friedman was becoming chair and was a prominent person at the University of Florida. So he was one of my primary mentors. I actually did an enfolded stereotactic and functional neurosurgery fellowship during my 4th year of residency with Dr. Friedman, and did largely research on radiosurgery. So that was my first research focus. And then he offered me a job. And at that point, what I had distinguished myself in was radiosurgery. And he offered me a job, and I said, no, okay. I'm not interested, because if I come here, I'm just the other guy who does what the famous guy does. I want to go somewhere where they need someone like me. And he said, well, what would it take to get you to stay here? And I said, well, deep brain stimulation is about to be FDA approved for Parkinson's disease. It looks like it's about to be approved, and Michael Okun and I are very interested in this. And, what if you were to pay me as an instructor at the University of Florida while I go to Grenoble and learn how to do deep brain stimulation from Professor Benavid, and then I come back and start a DBS program here. And interestingly, his response to that was, that's a great idea, let's do it, right? Which is not what you expect. The normal response to a question like that is, well, that's an interesting idea. Let me talk to the dean and see if we can get funding and, that sort of thing. But he didn't hesitate at all. He just said yes. And so then, in a negotiation, when your first demand is this crazy, unreasonable demand, and it's immediately met, then you're on your heels, right? So Anyway, so I ended up, Dr. Friedman was largely responsible for my going to Grenoble and learning to do DBS. And then I had at the time talked to Roy Baquet, who was at the beginning of Michael's 2-year fellowship. He was the neurosurgeon at Emory. And I was going to join him for the last 3 months of my fellowship time so that we could, work together, Michael and I, and get things ready to start the program at the University of Florida. And while I was in France, Roy Baquet moved to Chicago.
Oh,
and so
okay.
I had to decide what to do. And interestingly, now, it's funny because Bob Gross, who is now, just an amazingly large figure in functional neurosurgery, at that time, I had never heard of him, and he was taking over for Roy Baquet. And, I was thinking, I'm doing a traveling fellowship. I want to study with the masters. So I had to decide if I was going to go to Chicago or if I was going to go to Emory and study with this guy that I never heard of.
Sure.
And Michael's idea was, well, if you want to study with the masters, why don't you study with Malin DeLong and Jerry Vitek?
Mm-hmm.
Which was an interesting idea.
Yeah.
And actually, what I ended up doing, I did a neurology fellowship for 3 months at Emory. And that in the end, I think that gave me an interesting perspective that's been useful over the years to do those 3 months following Malin DeLong around and seeing patients in clinic with him.
Yeah.
That was really useful. And I think it also gives me the unique distinction of being the only person on the planet who has trained directly under both Benabid and DeLong.
Yeah.
I so wanted them to win the Nobel Prize.
Sure.
After they won the Lasker Prize. Yeah, so that I could be trained by them.
They still might.
Anyway, so my mentors, I've been very, very lucky with my mentors. They're amazing. I've spoken way too much. Let Michael go now.
I think at the end of the day, it is really all about the lives that you impact and the people that impacted us and were generous with us along our road. I want to be a history teacher, and so medicine was a little bit of a offshoot, of that, but the path has been a great path, and my path was more wanting to take care of people and to be a black bag sort of family practice kind of person. And then I ended up loving the brain. I didn't know much about the brain until I got to medical school. And frankly, for people that are listening, Kelly and I are mainly clinicians. You just like to take care of people, both of us. That's how we grew up. We didn't grow up in a research environment, even in our residencies. And the neurology residency that I went to had no movement specialist, no Parkinson's specialist. Had about 6 or 7 neurologists, almost all behavioral neurologists, famous figures, Ken Heilman, Bob Watson, Steve Nadeau, people that are known for behavioral neurology and how the brain works and spending an hour or two examining people. So I learned I got a good core of how brains and circuits worked, and then was able to apprentice with, Malin DeLong and Jerry Vitek. And at the time, there were over 10 movement specialists at Emory. It was the peak of Emory. They had come from Hopkins, and then the peak ended kind of right as I left. They all went off to be chairs of various places. Jerry Vitek, Ray Watts went to Alabama, and now is the president there of the whole University of Alabama in Birmingham. And Tim Greenemeyer went off to Pittsburgh and has had a storied career, and just just some wild, amazing people were there, and we just happened to be there at the right time, and they were very kind to us. And I like to say about Malin saw something in me I didn't see in myself, and it was more the excitement. And that's what a good mentor, a good coach does. And the excitement of learning about the circuits. And then I realized, okay, I can do research, but I didn't realize that, if it's fun, if it's something you're interested in, then it's great. Then you're just asking questions, and then people will pay you to answer those questions if you can learn how to write. And I knew how to write because I came from a history and poetry background. And so we've made some good friends along the way, but it's definitely been the people that looked out for us along the way. And so we try to pay it forward as much as we can.
And I know you're doing, so that's amazing. So last question about the Emory time, did you overlap with Cameron McIntyre? Because he was also a let's say, neurologist that made a neurological fellowship there, right?
Cameron took my office when I left Emory. So we maybe passed, like as he was interviewing to come kind of do postdoctoral work with Jerry Vitek. And then he took my office after I left. And then like I had Rob Turner's computer, like there's a whole bunch of people that all crossed and then Phil Starr was a little before us, there in Emory. So, and then there's a whole club of pedigree of people. And then if you look back on NeuroTree, they trace back to, like DeLong and then Everett's and then back to Sherrington, several, Ferrier, some really famous physiologists and people. So there's kind of a whole pedigree of people, but that's the group that is kind of physiologic circuit based groups of people. Then we all kind of think in some common circuitopathy, circuit, connections differently. That's why we have a hard time with understanding how transplants are just going to cure complex diseases, because we're thinking in terms of the whole circuits and how complex they are. And so there's a whole school of thought, that came out of this Hopkins Emory place. And Roy Bakay, who I was with before Kelly was there for a year and a half before he went to Chicago, was also a history of medicine guy, by the way.
Okay.
And so we learn a lot from Roy as well.
At a TEDxUF event in 2012, the two of you gave a talk entitled How to Control the Brain, which is obviously, control is a big word, but we do control, obviously, tremor and, other symptoms with deep brain stimulation. So how much are we, let's say, thinking a bit towards the future, Neuralink and all these things, how much are we controlling the brain and then currently and then maybe in the future? And then, of course, is that even a good thing? And you also talked about ethics in the talk.
I don't know if Michael has the same experience, but every once in a while, someone will remind us of that talk. And I've watched it a few times over the years, and every new time I see it, I become increasingly embarrassed about it.
We went for pizza and beer after that talk, and we thought it was like one of the worst talks we ever gave. Like we
I did not know that. That was not my intention. I think
we thought, God, we blew that talk, and we went for pizza and beer at a local place called Paisano's. And the reason is that Kelly and I, we've done something kind of unique. There's a lot of unique things about our relationship, but one of the unique things is we actually speak fluidly together, so we can get up on a lectern and sit next to each other and talk fluid, we can give a talk fluidly, like we've been practicing it forever. We've always been able to do that. And when we built the program at UF, there was no patients, there were no research grants, so we would have to go out and convince people to send us patients in the early 2000s.
We gave a lot of talks.
Yeah, there weren't you'd have to beg people to get on the table, for a DBS, stick something in your brain. And so we spoke a lot together. So the talk, we were filling in for somebody. If the truth be known to your listening audience, somebody had canceled, and I think our wives or Kelly's wife was on the Performing Arts Center board, and they said, we need to fill in. And so they put us in, and then I had to look up, I think you did too, what a TED Talk was, to make sure I understood, and we had to come up with one quickly. And we just thought that we really struck out on the talk, but over, 500,000 people, got on there and loved it. And the idea was pretty simple. Your brain controls everything. We can control your brain. And we wanted to show very simply how you could do this from a simple disorder and then tease people and build them up. The idea was a bit of a tease. We would tease you by building you up. Oh, what if we got a little bit more complicated, Then all of a sudden we show smiling or mood changes or memory changes. And then you're like, oh crap, there's this could get out of control. So we kind of wanted to get to that point where we got people, I think when we talked about it, we wanted to make people uncomfortable. We wanted to get people excited and jazzed, oh, we can control your brain. And not many people do TEDx's or TED Talks together. So, and you know what the reasons is, it's hard to do, right? So we thought it was horrible because we had given so many talks together, and we thought, oh, this is like one of the worst talks we ever gave, but people enjoyed it. And I think, you know, the one thing that's interesting, you know, you write a lot of papers and books and chapters and communicate, but, you know, like in that TED talk, like citation wise, people cite that as being an important moment for the field where people said, you know, there has to be an ethical guiding principle. We came to that, and we were able to express that better than you can express in a paper or something, and that's to alleviate human suffering. And it, you know, and as we head into the next era and the next generation and all the young people that are gonna, you know, have to figure out how this field is gonna go, you know, the idea of enhancement and brain enhancement and everything is gonna be one that I know people are uncomfortable talking about it. But, you know, we got to talk about it, and you can't stop it. You know, like there's too many countries, there's too many people. And Kelly made this point, and it's we either deal with it and talk about it, or we ignore it and we end up in a lot of trouble. I don't know if you want to comment on that, Kelly.
Yeah, at the risk of sounding hyperbolic, I think that the ability to manipulate the function of the human brain, even though what we do now is pretty crude, frankly, I think it's going to become more and more sophisticated. And we're going to, at some point, be able to do things that are augmentative, and there will be an ethical dilemma. I think that this power is, you know, like a lot of power, right? It's a tool, and it can be used for good or it can be used for evil. It's like, you know, nuclear energy, right? You can do wonderful things with it, and you can do terrible things with it. And I think this is a similar thing. I can remember a specific moment when I had an epiphany about this. I was being interviewed by it. You remember the magazine?
I remember the day.
So we were doing we had agreed to do this magazine article. Oh, it was
With David Noonan.
What was the magazine? Smithsonian Magazine.
Yeah. Okay.
Was doing an article, and they came and just sort of hung out with us for a week. And, you know, just were constantly with us. And now I'm nervous about that sort of arrangement, because of course they want things that are interesting and fascinating. And so, you know, whatever the most outrageous thing you say in a week's time of being, you know, talked to, that's the thing that's going to be used in the article. Right? But anyway, this very insightful Smithsonian Magazine reporter at one point asked me this question about augmentative neuromodulation. And I said, no, you know, we would only ever, the risk is unacceptable for that sort of application. Like no reasonable person would ever use this sort of surgical intervention for augmentative purposes. It's only used to treat pathology. And he sort of turned it around and he said, well, you know, you've just told me over the last several days that, you know, the risk of this intervention has gradually diminished over the course of, you know, the time that you've been doing it, and that the risk is becoming more and more acceptable, and that the benefit is actually improving as well. And it seems like that ratio is trending in a direction where, you know, at some point it might be reasonable. And when I had the epiphany was, he said to me, think of the plastic surgeons, right? Mm-hmm. Think of this field that began as reconstructive surgery for people who had disfiguring problems. You know, they got good at their craft, and they got to the point where the risk was acceptably low. And, you know, unfortunately, there's a market that drives intervention. I just realized, oh my gosh, this is going to happen. Yeah. This is going to happen at some point.
Yeah, and I'll just add, I was just looking up here because this is like ancient history, but when David Noonan was with us for the week, you know, Kelly had this enlightening moment. And what's interesting, when he wrote the article, we ended up on the word of the day. There's a famous website called the Word of the Day, and the word this is probably our greatest moment. Not any paper we ever wrote, it was being part of the Word of the Day. And the word of the day was satori, which means sudden enlightenment or intuitive understanding. And so they used the term satori in the article about the pathways and the complexity of the brain. But there was like this moment where we both thought, plastic surgery didn't start to enhance, people, and it gets there. And then we thought, oh my God,
this is really going to happen.
This is going to happen. And
I would even think if we have this Neuralink implant that you can just control your cell phone with, I think that's their first concept. There will be a crazy enough person that just wants it, because a geek that has the money or so and go to an oil platform to get surgery. I agree this will happen, right? And it is dangerous, but also really exciting future.
But people won't talk about it though, Andres. And when they did the film Hunting for Hedonia, they did a series that we almost helped them narrate it throughout. And so they did a series of interviews with a number of people in the field, and Kelly was talking about it openly, and people didn't like it, and made people, nervous. And then Kelly said, he said, I don't know, maybe I was, said to, and I said, no, we got to talk about it. You don't bring the dialogue, then, we're going to have more problems by not having the dialogue. So I have applauded him for really continuing to make his colleagues uncomfortable, by saying we need to have this discussion.
Super. Maybe for the listeners, that's a great movie. I think Hunting for Hedonia. You played a big part in it. I think the Freiburg team was also part of it, and some other worldwide. I think it's kind of based or leaned on the book The Pleasure Shock, that the author of which we also interviewed in the podcast, actually, about Robert Heath and also the history. So definitely can recommend that for the listeners as well to watch. Okay, so I did bring up the, in part to you, Kelly, embarrassing TED Talk only or mainly because I wanted to talk, I think in the beginning of that, you said, and I don't think it was embarrassing, by the way, for the record, but I think in the beginning you said something like, we're a neurologist and a neurosurgeon and we can't talk to each other, right? So that was the key thing I wanted to go into a bit more. You're a power couple, you've been managed, we've talked about it a bit already. So, but I wanted to ask some more questions just to highlight that, unique situation you have, being close friends, but also this July marks the 3rd year anniversary of the Norman Fixel Institute that the two of you built together, kind of from scratch, as far as I understood. So a great, history as friends and colleagues. If you had to compare yourself with, let's say, Lennon and McCartney, who would be who and why?
That's an easy one because when I was in college, everybody said, and I had a little bit longer hair, and everybody said I look like Paul McCartney. And people still say I have a resemblance to Paul McCartney. There's even some things that have gone around the internet with the faces, particularly when he was younger. Now, I'm a little more seasoned than I was before. So, and I used to work out in the morning. Every morning I would get up at 5 o'clock in the morning when I was younger, and I would go for a workout. Next to the gym was a Starbucks, and I would cancel my workout every morning, with a latte or something. It was like a 1-for-1 deal. I'd work out at 5 a.m. and then I would cancel it. And every morning until that Starbucks closed during the, when the market crashed, they had to close a bunch of their locations. Every morning for several years, the woman would write Paul on my coffee cup. And then when it closed, I finally said to her, I said, after all those years, I said, my name's not Paul. And she said, I know. I just, like you remind me of Paul. I get it in airports. I've been getting it my whole life. But I think I'm the Paul McCartney character. What do you think? And you're more willing to do more, drugs publicly. So you're probably more like Lennon, right?
Yeah. I think not just, but because he looks like Paul, but I think behaviorally that's sort of an apt analysis as well. I will say that in some ways he has what people would consider the neurosurgical personality. Michael is always this is good. Let's do it. Let's go right now. Get it, let's send this in. And I have always had sort of the more careful, methodical, wait a second, let me read this over one more time. I'm not sure this is ready. So, and I think that in most cases, those roles are reversed. So he's the fast mover, and I'm the one who's trying to say, hey, hold on a second.
The joke in the lab, Andres, is that like I'm the dreamer. Like I wake up and I get to work and I've thought up some idea, and then Kelly's like, if I'm not careful, he'll put a grant in and I'll end up in the operating room trying to figure out how to make something work that doesn't really work. Like it doesn't, like, because we're kind of always thinking out a few steps out in front. And so there have been circumstances where we've gotten there and realized, that we were ahead and that certain capabilities aren't there yet. But Kelly was a materials engineer. So my response to Kelly is, well, figure it out, dude. It should be possible. We should be able to do it. And so this has been the heart. I mean, it's a good summary. The heart of the relationship is I kind of wake up in the morning, with all these kind of new creative ideas. We go in and we try to innovate it. But Kelly has never said, he never kicked me out of the operating room. He's never said, oh, Michael, you're completely crazy. I mean, we've walked away from a lot of projects and things, as we've thought them through, but we've always taken the time to like philosophize through and think about even if we didn't do stuff. And there are grants and projects that we didn't get that we look back at and we say, gosh, I'm glad we didn't get that grant. That probably wasn't a good idea to do that. And so and people should know that in wisdom that not all decisions are perfect and you gotta work through them. But yeah, Kelly's right. It's a little bit of role reversal of neurologist, neurosurgeon.
Interesting. Who would be Captain Kirk? Who would be Spock?
Who'd be Spock?
So that's an interesting thing because I think there are two ways, and that so I think in some ways, but for the reasons I've already given, I would consider myself more the Spock figure. And of course, Michael is the one that everyone knows, right? Michael is out there interfacing with every single person on the planet, and I'm, doing my thing here, and trying to rein him in to some degree, which is an impossible task, as you know, he's unreignable. But that's one of the amazing things about Michael is, I think this happens to most of us. You'll be engaged in some clinical activity and you'll have this idea and say, I'll bet we have data that we could use to answer this question. We should look into that, right? I mean, I'm sure that happens a lot. But the difference is, throughout my career, whenever I've done that, the next week someone comes up to me with a draft and says, hey, I did it. I've looked at the data and here's what we have. What should we do now? And so like so many of those ideas that I think most of us have, just because Michael's around, get executed. He is a person who executes ideas, to an amazing degree.
Yeah. I mean, I think I would say, because he's avoiding your question, I would say that he doesn't realize it, but he's definitely the captain. Like everybody, all the fellows that come in, we've trained over 70 fellows, all the faculty, everybody has ultimate respect for Kelly. And the one thing that people don't know about Kelly Foote is there's this dig on stereotactic surgeons that they do stereotaxy because they like the Greek Cartesian coordinate system because you can hit anything from outside the brain, but if they get inside the brain, they get lost, and they're not great surgeons. And one, I don't think that's true, but two, he is the hand surgeon, like even within the group here at UF. So if you have something really bad, a brain tumor stuck somewhere, if you need somebody that takes their time, that does it right, that has the highest Press Ganey satisfaction ratings for anybody in the institution. I mean, even higher than any of the neurologists that we have in our department. It's this guy. Like, he spends more time with patients and families. And so he's the captain for sure. I mean, people follow him, you know, by example and by respect. And when they graduate from here and he stops and he's teaching all the fellows, even if they're neurologists, he's talking to them, and PhDs. We have 15 different PhD programs. So he's definitely the captain. And then the other thing probably that people don't know about me is I'm a born introvert, you know, so even through elementary school, if you had talked to my parents, they'll tell you I didn't talk much at all. Like, I was always the quiet kid in the back of the room and you'd have to like prompt me to say anything. Pretty hard to believe now, right, Kelly? But so I had to learn. It's not natural for me to be out there, but to get registries going, to get data together, to get groups to work together. I've learned the connectedness as a compensation strategy because it's not my normal like thing, but I realized to get things done, you got to get people moving and connected. And maybe that's also helped me as an observer of the world, because when you don't say anything, you observe everything. So, I don't know. Interesting.
So talking about,
he's like, no way, I don't do that.
Let's talk about that a bit. So I think one big thing you both organize, and maybe especially you, Michael, is the DBS Think Tank. And I think it's going to be the 10th edition this year. Is that correct? So it's 10 decade-long effort. How did that start? What is the significance? I think it has a tremendous significance for the field.
It is in its 10th consecutive year. It's survived hurricanes, 2 hurricanes, tropical storms, the COVID, but it has happened either on Zoom or in person, and this will be the 10th year in person. It actually, the birth of it comes from the idea that really great projects come when you take experts and you lock them in a room together and you tell them to check their egos at the door and try to get things done and collaborate, and maybe even provide some resource and get people to share data they wouldn't normally otherwise share, get people talking. A lot of these people, you know, they're all our friends. And maybe they didn't all start our friends, but you know, we all respect each other. And maybe friends isn't even the right term. We're all colleagues. Some of us are friends, but the more that we'll talk to each other and share with each other, the better chance we have of moving something forward for the field. And Rick Staub, who's the CEO of Tyler Swift for Dystonia Cure, we first started doing think tanks with Rick when there are just not enough people in dystonia. And so we would bring the top people in the world. We'd fly them here to Gainesville, Florida, at the University of Florida, and we would put them in a room. And a lot of these people, friends would not be the term I would have put on them when that started. And you know, sharing animals, sharing things together. And, you know, over the years, we've been able to get people to break down barriers, walls, get a lot of grants, get a lot of great research has come out of that, and get a group of people together. So it started with dystonia. We moved it, and as a group, we realized, you know, you have certain things you're good at, and maybe our group's superpower is connectedness. And so we leaned into that, and we've had a couple of different think tanks, and then the DBS Think Tank is going into its 10th year. The Fixel campus that you mentioned, we started as a program 20 years ago, and now we have a campus, an independent campus. One of the goals we have for the campus is to create a conference center place where people can come in and we can lean in and do more of these things. But the idea is not just to address the science. Like, we all love the science, right? But we didn't realize that there are ethical issues. We didn't realize there are policy issues. And we didn't realize that we could come up with all this hardware and people might not actually be able to get the hardware. And then we realize there are real lives and there's a real impact to a delay. And so if there's from point A to point B, if you can shorten that down and different people can be doing different parts and we can appreciate each other for doing the different parts and not reduplicating, we can actually move things along faster. So there's a whole bunch of things. And then just the idea of fighting and cussing and getting in a room and getting real with, you know.
That's people. My role in the think
yeah.
tank. My role in the think tank is to generate controversy.
Kelly's a grappler, you know. Yeah.
But, you know, something magical happens when you get a bunch of smart people in the same room who are heavily invested and care about the same stuff, and who are all trying to solve, if not the same, related problems, right? And if you just get everyone in the same room talking about the stuff that we're all passionate about, something magical happens. And that is by far my favorite meeting of the year, and it has been every time we've done it. When we first started, that first time, it was amazing. And we said we're going to have less than 30 people by design in this room. And to be honest, that was our plan from the beginning. We said we're never going to have more than 30 people at this meeting. It's just going to be a little meeting. And then it became impossible to make it less than 30 people. So now the format of the think tank has evolved over time to this hybrid meeting, where now we have, I think, less than 50. We try to have less than 50 people at the table.
Yeah.
And you've seen it. I love it because we do these UN style microphones where you have to activate your microphone in order to speak, and only 4 of these 30 microphones can be active at any given time. And so my measure of how interesting the conversation is how many people are smashing their microphone trying to turn it on, right? And just the key to that meeting for me is we have made an absolute rule that we will never spend more time on presentations than we do on discussion. Most of the meeting is dedicated to discussion, and the presentations really, their primary role is to initiate the interesting discussion, because the discussion is where the magic happens.
Yeah.
And when we go to most of the meetings that we go to, people make presentations, and there may be a minute or two at the end where you get to have a little conversation, and those are usually the most interesting part of the meeting.
Absolutely.
And so
usually there's not enough time.
Designed to maximize that, which is why we love that one.
Yeah, and really, there's an opportunity to bring forward science.
I have to complete a thought because I left it out, and it's important.
This is part of our relationship.
I mentioned that it's a hybrid meeting, so that now it's set up so that in person, what we try to do each year is say, okay, who's doing the most interesting, impactful work in neuromodulation right now?
Yeah.
And let's get those people in the room if we can. And so we invite as many of those people, and we get as many of those people in the room as we can. But now, there are so many invested people that it's ridiculous to not let people participate and experience it. So the rest of the meeting has become a Zoom accessible meeting. And even sometimes you can, as a Zoom participant, if you have something good to say, there's a way that we've curated so that, we can put you up on a screen and you can have a temporary microphone and participate as if you were sitting there. But the truth is, it's harder if you're in the Zoom crowd to be as involved in the conversation. Yeah. But if you have too many people, it's cacophony. And you can't have a meaningful conversation.
But it's culture too, because one of the things that's important about the tank is we've encouraged people to show unpublished data. And what's really interesting, Andres, is that that's a risk, like that a lot of scientists worry about, things getting stolen and all this stuff. And in my mind, and it's all culture. And when we built the institute here, from 2 of us up to 100 and something, it's all about culture, like how people treat each other and everything. And even creating culture and creating safety is unlocking and letting people interact and everything. And so people, even as the meetings become more and more open, people are still willing and excited to show their data and starting to realize, what's the price of not sharing your data? Like to people like that in the disease, there's a price that society pays for that. And so getting over ourselves and being able to do that. So one of my biggest fears going forward is, as more people jump on with the Zoom and want to be part of it, it's great. Keeping that still the core of the, like, we're still going to really challenge each other and say, well, that's dogma. Like, why do we, maybe that's not right. And continuing to share things that other people haven't seen and not worry so much, even if somebody does try to jump out, and take your data or run with it, try to worry less about that and more about the societal impact of why we're at the table. It's hard.
Yeah,
right?
So it's a tough balance. I totally agree. But on the other hand, I would probably perceive that too, that with, preprints and, a bit more this culture shift towards potentially open science, open data, it might also be in the right time. And, there could be this random person from some country, see it replicated really fast and publish it. But then is that really being scooped though? Most of the things are probably, you can still publish them. And if you do it better than, but it is a cultural change that needs to, or that is happening. And you're right at it with the COVID and Zoom hybrid event. So I must say, for me, I only participated via Zoom so far, once as a speaker, which was a big honor, and it was amazing to just listen in, and essentially that he made it open. I think there's so much benefit for so many people. How many listeners did you have on Zoom? I think it was thousands, right? Or a lot.
It was a lot last time. Yeah.
A lot of people come on, but we want people to share, and and I'll just say for anybody that's listening to this podcast, most of the time when somebody takes your stuff, and we've been victims of this too, where you share yourself, somebody takes it, even if they do it, science needs to be replicated, and usually they'll give some half-baked paper on something. Maybe they're first, but a lot of times the first mouse gets caught in the trap. They get the cheese, but they get caught in the trap. So I'll tell you, and a lot of times it's half-baked, and as anybody, and we should all know better as scientists. When you work on something for a long time and you really work it out well and you write a really good paper, that's the meaning of it. And the rest is sort of, noise. Does it continue to replicate across the field? And I think like you said, I think we worry, and there's too much of this race. Is it to be first, or is it to be right and impact society and do it in a what I call half-baked way? And most of these people, like random people that try to scoop, they're half-baked, and they come and they go in the field. There's no story there for their groups. They just jumped in and jumped out, and they play a role in just providing Google level data to say, hey, Andres was right, his connectomics were right. But let him explain now that he's been doing this for years, how this actually works in this network.
No, I totally agree. So that's I once heard, I think one of my mentors said it's better it just doesn't matter to be first, but to do it best, right? So done it in a solid way. And so on.
Say, don't ever say you're first. So that helps you, right? That's a good coaching method, because you probably aren't. Probably lots of people probably appreciated it, but they never published it.
Absolutely, yeah. Super. So moving forward, similarly, probably originated from Think Tank is that, Michael, you're the founding PI for the International Database and Public Registry for Tourette deep brain stimulation, which again is, I think, a major effort that helped the field tremendously. Can you speak a bit about that, maybe challenges, but also what came out of it so far, what the plans are?
Yeah, just for folks to know that there's a disease, that is very common called Tourette, that you can have motor tics and phonic tics and all sorts of behaviors like obsessive compulsive disorder and ADHD, and can be very disabling, although it's a very common disease. So a lot of people are not necessarily disabled by it. Big delay in diagnosis. And then there's a group of people that their lives are really impacted by this. So a small group within that, larger, swath of people that have tics and behavioral disorders that really have no options, some of which might, have such bad tics that their neck moves back faster than what happens in a car accident, and can cause spinal cord injury. They can have self-injurious issues. They can have social adjustment issues. You can imagine with tics. And so over the years, a number of us have been interested in those circuits. And so in my lab, I actually started my career focused on Tourette, on Parkinson as a paroxysmal disorder that, there must be a physiology. Remember, we all came out of this long circuit based, almost like, group of people that were interested in where the circuits and how and the why. And so to me, Tourette always fascinated me. There must be a paroxysm of physiology. And so could we track it down? And so through a series of NIH grants over a number of years, pulling in all sorts of people, Kelly Foote's been the whole way along with the lab. Aysegul, Gunduz, Justin Sanchez worked with us in the lab before he went to DARPA, did some of the early physiology work with us when he was at University of Florida. We've sort of been on this, kind of unpopular and difficult area. And a lot of people didn't go into Tourette, even in the stereotyping and functional area, because it's the management of the folks and the families and everything is so difficult. It's a very tricky management as well. And so people shy away from that. There's a great article by Joe Jankovic showing that the majority of time on telephone calls in the movement disorders clinic come from Tourette. And so, it's kind of like opening Pandora's box, but these people really needed help. And so it's something I've been passionate about, and we've been developing physiology as to why and trying to develop it from voluntary movements and tic movements and showing the different physiologies, trying to develop some closed loop and open loop technologies and duty cycles. But somewhere around, 2010 or so, the Tourette Syndrome Association, that became the Tourette Association of America, their board, half of their board was like, this looks super, like, because they didn't have any options for these people. And half of their board was scared to death, because they thought if you wait long enough, tics are going to go away into their 20s. And so they had a huge, fight amongst themselves. I don't know if it's a fight, but disagreements. And normally, because they wanted to protect people. And so they came out with a guideline. It was led by John Mink, and there was a lot of, John's great. I mean, obviously fantastic scientist. That's the surround inhibition model of Tourette. And, but they, kind of delayed the age of onset to be able to give DBS to 25 because they didn't know, would it be safe? Would it go away? And a lot of debate. And we all got together in Italy, somewhere around Lake Como. I have faint memories of that, probably because of the food and wine were so good. And there was a lot of debate during that time. A lot of people going to TV stations, a lot of hype. It just was like, it was crazy. And so we decided, what if we could get everybody together, and no single center is going to be able to implant enough patients to get a randomized study together. So if we just temporarily give up on that idea, what if everybody just gave their data into a central registry? And so we proposed it to the Tourette Association of America, tried to get some matching funding, wrote some grants, and then we were able to offer anybody in the world that wanted to contribute the generous contribution of no money, because we didn't have any. It reminds me when we started our lab, we spent all our money on equipment. We got $150,000. That was our startup package. We spent it on equipment. So we had to get students to volunteer in our lab for many years because we didn't have the money. And here in Tourette, we had to get people to volunteer to give us their data. And it comes back to the connectedness equation. People were willing to do it. We got enough data together, and fast forward now, a dozen or more papers. The group has been working together, publishing. We've been able to get some much better guidelines out there. We have a publicly available database that was put out in JAMA Neurology, and a lot of good imaging and predictor models have come out. We got more images than we thought. And I'll tell you, Andres, when we started the project, the goal when we wrote the first grant was, could we get 30 good cases together?
Wow,
Could we just get 30 good cases? Maybe we could help the field. And what happened is now we have over 300 registered.
Wow.
And we have a lot more because people are sharing it. They can see it in real time. It helps people in management. And like Kelly Foote says, like, they're the intangibles. Like, people will say, oh, you're looking at all these papers. the intangible is probably the most important thing on the project. The intangibles that have happened. Now people know what to measure, who to select, what to measure, like just the little things that actually change the safety and the trajectory of this disorder as we move forward have been really, important for the field. And now we have enough data that we've been talking to regulatory agencies around the world to see, can we get to some sort of approval? We've been writing ethics papers because we've got all sorts of ethical dilemmas. Now we have a disorder we know can help, or a treatment that we know can help a disorder, maybe even stop somebody from having a bad injury like a spinal injury. And the regulatory systems are 20 or more years old in the US and in other areas. We've got to figure out how to navigate that, how to navigate, payer systems, how to navigate insurance. And there's a problem across every country in the world. And we have another common paper coming out with Gertie Visibender-Wale and, in Cologne in Nature Medicine, talking about this in OCD. And, we could blame the payer systems, we could blame the insurance companies, we could blame the countries. But then you start to look at it, it's a worldwide problem where we can't get access to people with these small diseases. And so we become really interested. So there's another intangible of these registries that it's helping to push the dialogue along, because think about it, close your eyes and think about the world we live in when we can have a therapy and your kid has something and or your child has something and they can't get it. It's a problem. So,
it is a big problem. And
interesting.
I guess the network itself strengthened probably with that database as well, right? Now you have a group of people that have a shared voice, that you're leading there. So that might also be a really great benefit beyond all the science of it. So
it's hard to measure that in number of papers or whatever, but I think, I don't know, Kelly, what do you think? There's an intangible.
You talk about, and tangible benefits. The truth is, scientists in surgical neuromodulation of the brain have the problem of low N, right? This is our life. We don't have enough power because we just don't do enough of it.
Yeah, statistical power, you mean, right?
Statistical power, right? Yeah. So the registry is an approach to deal in these disorders where we're not going to have enough power to say something that is scientifically meaningful about this disorder unless we all get together. And so, I think that's what probably the genesis of it. But, interesting things happen when you create a registry. A bunch of smart people get together and say, well, what's the data that we should try to gather on each of these patients? And we have to generate a form to fill out, right? For each patient who has surgery for this disorder, if you have this data, please fill it in, right? So we send this form out, but a bunch of smart people got together to create that form. And then when we send that form out, people who are doing this say, oh gosh, I wasn't collecting that data, but perhaps I should.
Yeah.
And so it's this subtle way of encouraging best practices by asking for the data that we think you probably ought to be gathering.
Yeah.
You may or may not know this, but functional neurosurgeons and neurosurgeons in general don't like to be told how to do things. Right?
Yeah.
That's probably the line of the podcast. You want to say that again? I'm going to make sure people get
Well, it's really one of the sort of ridiculous things about our field is we don't tell each other, like, this is a better way than that. And we all do things the way we do them. We're all smart people. We all do things the way we do them because we believe they're the best way. But we don't talk enough together about why we do the things the way we do them. And, I think we do a relatively poor job of sharing best practices. Because
where people target or how they target, which corners, which landmarks they use. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
But I will tell you this, the counterpoint to this that I love, that I didn't understand 20 years ago, that I understand now, is the variability in how people do stuff. When you actually don't know what the answer is, this is like the wisdom, like of being around it. When you don't know what the answer is, it's actually good if people are doing it, even if they're totally, you know, like there's no way, and they're married to their way. And then as long as they're willing to share the information, and then you can look at that variability, you can learn from it. I remember Kelly and I had a grant with a very famous surgeon, and you know, we were testing a method, and I won't give you the details because I don't want to out the person, but you know, like part the way through the grant, it ended up a huge failure because they decided, like, you know, like they were sure their way was right, and then at some point during the grant, they pulled back and decided, oh no, I don't do it like that. I would never do it like that, you know, because they, you know, like, so when you're assessing, you know, like the risk of things, but that's good. I mean, like, of course it's hard to lose a grant or to lose a paper or to lose an idea, but on the flip side, when you actually put it to the test, you see, like, people say you can't change people's minds. Well, maybe that never makes it to the light of day, but certainly the idea that sharing, you know, best practice or putting them to the test certainly changed minds. And then over time, that the idea of how people do that has changed in the field. And I think this is a very good, very credible person. And so I would also say to people that you can change minds, you know, and I think it's an important part of the journey.
Absolutely. Well said. So, speaking a little bit more about tics, I heard, Kelly, actually, you'd give a talk in China, might be Shanghai or Beijing, about a tic decoder. And we also had Aysegul, Gunduz that worked on the podcast before. But can you maybe summarize, or either of you, but maybe you can start, Kelly, what that work is about, and also maybe pivot that to closed loop DBS and the future a bit of neuromodulation?
Sure. Well, let it be said from the outset here that Aysegul Gunduz is the brains behind this whole thing, right? She's the one who is able to figure it out. And the tic detector is this amazing thing. I can tell a funny story about Sanjay Gupta as part of this, right? And I can't remember what version of that talk I gave that you might have seen, but in one version of that talk, I show a video of Sanjay Gupta because he came and visited our OR and did an episode of his TV show on CNN. I can't remember.
Vital Signs.
He has a medical TV show called Vital Signs, and he did an episode, and you know, it was our second case of Tourette where we were implanting cortical strips, 4 contact cortical strips over the motor area, and then central median nucleus thalamus deep electrodes bilaterally, and plugging them all in at the same time. So 16 channels of recording continuously in an awake behaving person with Tourette syndrome. So we were super excited about, you know, what we could do with this. We're all kind of huddled around the microelectrode recording machine, and looking at the raw signals. And at one point on the TV show, the camera comes in close on Sanjay Gupta, and he points at one of the lines on the machine, and he says, "You can see right here when she ticks, you can see the signal change." You know, and we all just sort of rolled our eyes. We all laughed. like thinking, we're like, yeah, of course, you can see in the raw signal that, you know, exactly what's happening. You know, and because what we were used to was recording signals in the operating room, taking them back to the lab, post-processing, doing a bunch of stuff, and then maybe a couple of months later saying, "Hey, there was something in here." You know, so that's what we expected. And I'll be damned if Sanjay Gupta wasn't completely right. Mm-hmm. The signal was so strong in the raw central median nucleus of the thalamus signal that it was tightly correlating with that low frequency activity was correlating with tics and not correlating with voluntary movement.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it was such a cool moment when we realized this. And, you know, if there's ever any question of whether the central median nucleus of the thalamus participates in the circuitry of Tourette disorder, I can tell you unequivocally and absolutely it is part of that circuit, because this tic detector is just so reliable.
Yeah. And then you don't need any statistics, right? If you can see it in the data. I think Peter Brown once said that.
It was super easy.
It reminds me of something that Malin DeLong, taught me, where he showed me one of the papers that he and one of his students at the time named Miller. It's one of the original papers where you remember all the stuff that came out about the GPI being overactive and Parkinson's disease and in the primate. And so they wrote about it and everything. And then he'll show you the paper, and I have the picture. Sometimes I show it to the students here, and they totally missed the pattern change. Like at first, like they saw the rate, but they totally missed the pattern. And and you look at it, you're like, there's no way. Like, how could you not see there's a pattern? You look at it, but like you see what you want to see in the data. There are famous scientists that have said that. And when it came to Tourette, I remember early on myself, and then Justin Sanchez was with us for a while. We looked at a lot of the signals, and he looked at a lot of animal signals, and then when Aysegul Gunduz came along, and she's the brains of the operation, for sure. We got picked on some, like, for looking at those signals, and even one of the reviewers on a grant, really boldly questioned whether our signal was even real, and wanted us to go back to raw signals too. Getting back to the Sanjay Gupta thing, we went back to the raw signals, and we realized that again we were focusing so much on the objective lens of the microscope, but we zoomed out 50,000 feet. And John Shute, who was in the lab, I think he works for Boston Scientific now. At the time, some of these kids are really smart. John was a really smart guy. He was able to, as we had the discussions in lab group, go home and literally within a day or two, pop back up and say, look, we can make a human tic-detector off of like the signal without even like using that much, trial, just looking at M1 cortex and in thalamus. And so it is a really interesting moment. And then of course, as you think about closed loop, you think about it's not just, it's like you say, when somebody can steal, some piece of this, there's a 20 years worth of this that's been going on in our collective laboratories, and then being able to separate it, voluntary tick from tick movements, being able to pick it up, the different body parts, the somatotopies, there's a lot of complexity to this. So it's going to take a lot of people to unlock this journey, but it still gets back to that original thing we had when we started the lab. Why? Like, why do people tick, and where in the circuitry? And there must be some paroxysmal thing that's popping up. And remember, we said Dr. Evil, we should be able to find that, like you start out with this Dr. Evil thought. There must be some way to capture this energy coming out of the brain. And that was really how it all started.
Yeah, it was sort of in retrospect, a naive notion. The reason we picked Tourette as the first target for closed loop DBS was because it's a paroxysmal disorder. Most people aren't ticking all the time, right? And most people have this premonitory urge that builds prior to the tick. And so we said, well, there must be some neurophysiologic correlate with that urge. Let's find that. That'll be our trigger for activation for therapeutic stimulation. It's a sort of an obvious application for closed loop, paroxysmal with the precursor, behavioral precursor. And I laugh about it when I think about it now, because boy, if we were smart, we would have done essential tremor first.
Right. We took us a few years to write that grant and show how like that one. But
we've been trying to do closed loop DBS for Tourette for 15 years.
I got us into like a much more difficult, disease and a much more difficult problem. But the journey along the way, even for the companies, and the companies are part of the think tanks too. We've been able to, them participating too and sharing with us, there's another intangible of driving the technology. Like a lot of the technologies early on that you're using now, the LFPs, the other things, the way they measure, the way they change, like little things that's like you wouldn't even think twice about, those devices couldn't do before. And it's the people in the laboratories that are slaving along telling things, if your device doesn't do this, we can't get to the next moment. And so there's a whole shadow culture here that has to happen in order to enable the next generation to go forward. But those early devices, I remember some of the early ones are like, we can only turn it. It would be like taking a clicker and, like, you remember the old click, 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 on your TV, it was like that. It was like, what? And then you can't independently do between sides and different channels. I mean, there were all sorts of like, whoa, like this isn't going to work. This isn't going to translate. And so all of those things had to be worked out early, but there were a lot of Radio Shack moments, I think, I know Radio Shack's gone, but there's a lot of Radio Shack
just to go back to your original question about closed loop, I mean, because that was a part of the question, I think. I do think that closed loop neuromodulation is the next phase. I think it's just so intuitively obvious to me that it would be better in these network disorders that are all dynamic to have a system that can identify a pathologic signal and respond to it, than to just continuously bombard this circuit with pulses of electricity. So I think more intelligent DBS is going to be adaptive. And there are a bunch of reasons that makes sense to me. I don't know what the timeline is, but I'm absolutely certain that closed loop, all DBS, all brain neuromodulation will be adaptive in the future, because that's just the obvious better way to do it.
Yeah, I'm not sure I totally agree with that. I mean,
he's wrong.
Yeah. So I think it's, people look for the big C, we talk to support groups, they want to cure everything. And I think it's really it should be the big P. It should be personalizing across, right? And so I think duty cycle.
That's why you need adaptive.
Yeah, well,
personalized.
So duty cycle works really well for a lot of the Tourette patients, showing that it doesn't have to be on. Another step in the journey, right? Showing that these things don't have to be on all the time.
So that's a transitional phase to an adaptive, which would be better.
Perhaps, but like it just, I think that the limbic tone, as you like to say, in people, the tone, it's going to be different. And I don't think it's going to be a one size fits all. And when you have all these circuits that do different things and have different symptoms, and you're tuning against different symptoms, there's going to be more efficient ways to get to the solution. And I remember when we started 20 years ago, Frank Bova said to us, you guys do everything on everyone. That's how you start, like, as a research group. You do everything on everyone. And he's like, 20 years down the road, and here we are. We're just entering our 20th year this week, and our 21st year. And, here we are, right? Like, and we've learned that lesson, like, where you're going to find the chaos. And so it might be more efficient to do continuous stim for some things, or to do coordinated stim, or to do duty cycle stim for different symptoms, and then have it cycle into different modes and different things. But I think as our understanding evolves, we haven't been at it that long you talk about a generation of 20 or 30 years, that's not that long for being at this type of work, like, where's it going to be in 100 years, from now, when we're all gone? It'll be a lot more elegant. We'll understand the circuits, and maybe if we understand the circuits well enough, we won't have to do this like we're doing it now. So,
well, I assume that in 50 years, people in our field are going to look back at what we're doing today and think, wow, those guys were completely crazy.
Yeah, exactly the feeling we had after we gave the TED talk, right? Like, oh, that was terrible.
It could happen. I mean, probably not crazy, not like, we now look at, let's say, the Robert Heath time, probably not like that, but I think work is more scientific now, and more potentially a bit more evidence-based, hopefully, but you're right. They might think we didn't have a clue what we were doing. That could certainly happen. I totally agree. I want to be mindful of your time, but I have so many questions on my list still, but I could go on forever, but I know you're both really busy. Maybe just a few rapid fire questions to wrap up. So since we were talking about timelines, what's your estimate, maybe in a single sentence, when will we have a cure for Parkinson's disease, or how will it look like? And maybe Alzheimer's as well. Is that going to happen even, or?
I'll leave that one to you.
Yeah, so I get asked this all the time. Recently, in fact, I slipped a card at a talk that I was giving to folks who have Parkinson's disease, and like a card saying, when are we going to get the cure on an index card? And so people promise the cure, like in 5 years, give me a whole bunch of money and I'll give you a cure in 5 years. I think the fundamental problem is that Parkinson isn't one disease. That's the first thing to think about. So thinking about an all-in silver bullet cure is probably not the right question and not the right way to go about it. That's the first point. The second point is we're all mortal, okay? And I think that we have to come to terms with that. So I think we have to more meld in healing with medicine, and Eastern medicine cultures talk less about cure and more about living well and living longer. And so there's a difference between health span and lifespan. So I think, evolving on the health span. Now, having said that, you say, oh, where is he going with this? Having said that, I do think that there are, smaller numbers of genetic abnormalities that we might be able to, to really develop something that could be, akin to, to making a huge dent. And you think about powerful symptomatic therapies, which is where we at with things with like neuromodulation. In the middle, you think about slowing disease in some meaningful way, disease progression. People don't use the term neuroprotection anymore, right? Because you fail enough times, you change the word, right? So we talk about disease modification or whatever. And then people talk about cure. There are 3 buckets, but I kind of been over my career changing the C bucket to the P bucket to the personalized bucket, and starting to think about lifespan, instead of lifespan, thinking about health span. And then if there are going to be shots at really if you were looking at a cancer or something like that, in a complex degenerative disease, for example, if you're going to have a shot at it, probably some of the more monogenetic things might be the ones to go at. But I think curing everything is probably not really what we're on the planet to do.
So you're saying Kelly Foote is gonna keep his job, essentially?
Well, I don't know. So he's the surgeon. He probably thinks we're going to cure everything from Alzheimer's. So it'll be interesting to see what he thinks.
I remember when it was probably 15 years ago. One of our collaborators at the Brain Institute here created dopaminergic neurons that were patient-specific from stem cells, from autologous stem cells from one of our Parkinson patients, and created these, was able to go back
from an autopsy.
Yeah,
from an autopsy.
Was able to go back to the lab and create the exact cells that are missing, right? These are the cells that this person with Parkinson's disease is missing. We get it. We did it. Right?
Yeah.
Right. We didn't do it.
Sounds really promising. Yeah.
Right. Again, it was one of these one of these big moments, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think gene therapy is a powerful tool. I think stem cell therapy is a powerful tool, and some combination of those with modern genetic techniques, those are the tools that are going to lead us more in the direction of Mike says C word stuff. Yeah. He doesn't even want to say cure out loud because it feels ridiculous. But I do think that there are technologies and tools now that are going to move us in that direction. And I would love to be put out of a job by some biologic solution that someone figures out, for sure. So far, a lot of the interim, the attempts still involve neurosurgical, implantations of some of these cells. So maybe I wouldn't be completely out of a job. They'd still need me.
I don't know about you, but when I go home, a lot of times my wife Leslie says, "So I mean, you've been at this so long. Have you cured Parkinson yet?" And you get that every night when you come home. And sure, we would love to put it, book it, put it behind us. But I think we have to think, and I don't think I'm becoming wiser to know that I think we have to reframe this dialogue.
I mean, you did co-author the book Ending Parkinson's Disease, right? So with the attempt maybe to, I must admit I haven't read it yet, but I think what I've gathered is it is also really a plan for action also in terms of science communication to politics. Is that correct? Like what would need to happen?
Yeah, so it's a different kind of book. It's written by Ray Dorsey of Rochester, Bosch and Bloom, in Nijmegen in the Netherlands, and Todd Scher, who at the time was the CEO of the Michael J. Fox Foundation. The title was changed by the publisher, which anybody who publishes, from these, major publishers, that the major publishing houses will push you and change your title, right? So the original title was actually The Parkinson Pandemic. And it turns out that as it came out, the pandemic came out like right around the same month, and they kicked themselves for changing the title. So our title is Parkinson Pandemic, but it isn't about curing Parkinson. It's about other diseases and tells the story of HIV, the story of breast cancer, the story of polio, and how did they sort of get ahead, and even the funnel. So like we all fight like over scraps, like we're all fighting over, you spent all that money, Dr. Horn, on that project, and that was dumb, like we shouldn't have done that. And we're all fighting with each other about this. And it turns out that the funnel against these other diseases, you put $250 million of NIH, National Institutes of Health money, biggest funder of medical research in the world. You put 250 million, or 200 million in for Parkinson, you need 3 billion a year to move the HIV needle. To something that isn't a cure, isn't a C cure for HIV, but has changed it to a chronic livable lifespan condition, right? From lifespan to health span, as we talked about. And so if you were going to move the needle, on Parkinson, we need to have those discussions. And so we came up with the pillars of other diseases, like what did they do to move the needle? Prevent, advocate, care, and develop new treatments. But there has to be sort of weight on each of those pillars. But yeah, I'm not a big fan of that title. I told the publisher that along the way. I like our original title, but it does get a point, and I think it's a great discussion.
Super. Maybe last question to wrap up with advice for young students that enter the field that might be listening. How did you get where you are now? What should they do? What should they look into?
Well, first of all, I would like to say that this is perhaps the most exciting time to enter into this field that I can imagine. I feel like we have a bunch of new tools that we didn't have before, that we can exploit and make dramatic progress in a much shorter time. So I think if you want to have a career in the science of neuromodulation, this is the time to be in that. It's pretty exciting. I would say things that have been beneficial to my career over time. I think some of them we've touched on in this interview. Relationships with people. You cannot underestimate how important that is to have good relationships with people. And we don't talk about it, but it's critically important. And making sure that people get credit for what they do. Making sure that if someone's working hard, they feel like someone notices that they're working hard, and that if they're making a valuable contribution, that they're acknowledged for that. Those are sort of core principles that we have tried to instill in our culture here that I think have been powerful. And this is sounding a little preachy, but just a culture of mutual respect is so powerful. If you have a bunch of people who like coming to work, you can get so much more done. And what determines whether someone likes coming to work or not is whether they feel like they're doing something meaningful and whether they feel like somebody cares what they're doing.
Yeah.
And they're being acknowledged. So anyway, those are big things. In terms of my personal evolution, I mean, I attribute my success to relationships and mentors. I've been extraordinarily lucky I have a partner that I was friends with first and partners second. And that has, been a secret weapon over the years, I think, because we sort of understand each other. And I think that's useful. So people, I guess my answer is people.
Love it. Michael?
I agree with obviously, and you can see why hearing a neurosurgeon, the words roll off his lips, why I love working with the guy so much. Talk with people, don't talk at people, I think is really important. Culture is really important. Kelly touched on that. Our careers and my career, and I want people listening to understand that when we started, people thought we were crazy here. We came here, there was no DBS program, there was no Parkinson program, there was no Parkinson neurologist. And, my boss said, you're a nice kid, you're a polite kid, you're the kind of kid that writes thank you notes and opens doors and, is friendly to people. But you're talking about sticking things in people's brains. So, try not to embarrass us, like there was a moment of like that. And so, I want people to understand that, like you can start out and, on your path and go at what you're passionate about. And our careers, I have a summary slide of our careers and it's basically 3 Muppets or Sesame Street figures. The one on the left is Beaker. That's when we were assistant professors, right? And that's you're crazy, like just crazy in the lab. You want to do this to people. So we're like Beaker and the Muppets. And then you move to the middle. The middle is when we get promoted to associate professor. That's Joe Cool, Snoopy with the Joe Cool, sunglasses on. It's cool, not accepted, but what you're doing is cool. You get a promotion, you're moving along. And then the third one is the Sesame Street character of Cookie Monster in the smoking jacket. Everybody from all over the world wants to come to the Norman Fixell Institute, and they want you to fix anything that's like potentially wrong with them. And it's like you're the Muppet sitting in a smoking jacket, and everybody's like walking in the office like dude, we want you to do this. Before it's like we're not even sure we want to like go on the table. And it's that transition across the career. And for us, it's all been about the people, as Kelly said, the passion, sticking with it, being honest. Not everything we did worked, like along the way, sharing credit and creating the culture. And, we've had a simple culture we live by, and that's that the patient's the sun and we should all orbit around the patient. We've done this for 20 years. It was serendipitous luck that the picture that hangs on the front of our Institute of Norman Fixell has a sun over his left shoulder. It was his favorite picture, but it epitomizes what we always say that we are. If we do that, the doctors know better than anybody else. We're no better than any scientist. We understand the people that are out there, like Aysegul, Gunduz, and others that are making the big contributions that are really moving the needle. And we all work together, and we do it to impact as many lives as you can. So spend as many minutes as you can doing the things you're passionate about, and get somebody to pay you to do that, and you're going to have a great life.
Sounds great. Thank you so much for these words. Anything else you wanted to discuss that we didn't cover, like that was crucial? Or, it was so long, we covered a lot, but anything you want to share that?
Well, I would just say that over the years, we've been, we've been honored to be part of groups that have been involved in a lot of interesting, pioneering, mind-blowing, can you believe that happened? We've had serendipitous moments of smiles and panic attacks that are induced by neuromodulation and memory flashbacks. And, we've had a very interesting career, but instead of, just immediately like celebrating and going to the pub, I think it was important to share that information and that knowledge with people. And so that groups of us could get together and figure out what those circuits really were doing. And so I would just say for people that are out there, the serendipity, the discovery, just what you see on the road as you're traveling. There were no roads, until people walked on them, right? It's a famous philosophy. And as you're going on that road, you got to look at that road And then you got to draw the map and you got to tell people, so the people that come after you can help you to pick up the details. Malin DeLong's model, we talk about this a lot in our lab meetings. It wasn't perfect. You know, I love being like a father, but his model wasn't perfect. But it gave us the basis, the foundation to build a house and to improve. And so as we lay down some road for people to travel after us, we gotta publish, we gotta be real, and we gotta help people so that they'll be able to.
You're talking to one of the world's greatest map makers right here.
I know. That's why I'm saying, like, I'm looking at the guy that has
he's the cartographer right now.
Kelly and I are the simpletons, you know, and it's going to take smarter people like you and Aysegul Gunduz and Chris Butsons and Corey Hemptines and others, you know, that are going to have to take this field to the next level.
Thank you so much for saying that. It's too much. You're certainly much smarter and much wiser than most of the people you said, and have so much experience. So it's amazing to have you as mentors in the field, and as the whole field. I think we all profit so much from your activities. So thank you for that. And also thank you for participating. This was a true honor to be able to spend time with you, pick your brains. It was busy to find a schedule for the two of you for so long. So thanks for that as well to the secretaries that helped. And then,
Thanks for letting me spend my birthday with you. Today's my birthday.
Happy birthday.
Oh, I did not know that. Happy birthday, Michael.
That's why you saw all this stuff all over my office. People have been there. So it's great.
Thanks, Andreas.
Congratulations.
It's been fantastic to chat with you and you know, keep going with your career. You're doing great things.
Thank you so much. All the best.
Yeah, take care.